So anytime, so what does it mean God foreknew? Well, anytime the word foreknew is mentioned in the Bible, you got to look at who the subject is. If the subject is man, here's what happens. It means foreknowledge. It means, in other words, prior info. It means I know what's going to happen if man is the subject. For instance, Amy had foreknowledge. If you get that chainsaw and start cutting down a tree, we're going to end up in the hospital. She had foreknowledge of that. If you do that, that tree is going to hurt something bad. It's going to destroy something in our yard or our house. She foreknows that, right? That's prior knowledge based on what's going to happen if you do that. Anytime in the Bible that the word foreknowledge is used and man is the subject, then it means prior knowledge. But when God's the subject, it never, ever, ever means prior knowledge. It means to determine. Especially when it talks about entering into relationship. God doesn't just know foreknow what people are going to do. He foreknows people. Let me give you some verses that can help you get it. Romans 11:2. In Romans 11:2, the first part, it says, God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Okay? Now look at Amos chapter 3, verse 2. In Amos 3, the prophet says, you only, he's talking to Israel, they are the you only have I known. Now remember the word known and foreknow, he's talking about knowledge. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. So if you look at that, remember that's what I said is when God is the subject with foreknow, it's talking about determining in relationship. Now, he knew every tribe, every nation. You see, if you read this, does that mean that God only knew Israel? He went to Israel. Oh, there's somebody else on the planet? You mean you're not the only nation? I could have really had somebody else. I mean, you guys are a bunch of buffoons and don't follow me sometime. There's somebody else I could have. That's not what God means. He didn't mean, oh, you're the only ones I knew. He created every nation. He created every tribe. He knew the name of every person of every nation. He didn't just wait till they were born and said, oh, I can't wait to see what mama names them. You know, that's not what God does. God, knowing Israel, of all the nations of the earth, you're the only one I've known, meant you're the only one I've set my love on and entered into a relationship with. That's what it means. That's what it means. And then in Jeremiah 1:5, the prophet, talking to the prophet, he says, before I formed you in the womb. You see, before the first snowflake fell, before the first wave lapped on the beach, before the first sunrise, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. I knew you, he said. I knew you. And so as we look at this, you know, Moses also, remember what Moses said. Moses said about Adam and Eve. He said Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she became pregnant, and she conceived and bore a son. So he's not talking, when he says Adam knew Eve, he's not talking about, in that context, he's not talking about info. Adam just didn't know what kind of fruit she liked. Right? He didn't know what kind of leaves, you know, she liked to what her leaf size was. He didn't know, he didn't just have information about her. Although he did, obviously the context, he knew her, she conceived, it's talking about sex. And God just didn't use the word knew so he'd avoid the word sex. God said, I got to talk about what they did here, and I don't know if I want to mention sex. Knew, that's a good word. That's not why Moses put that in there. He put it in to emphasize the fact of knowing is the deepest intimate relationship. And so as we come back here, what we see and what we know is, that Romans 8 biblically, knowing God is salvation. That's why Psalm 46:10, which is my favorite verse of the Bible, says, be still and know God. Be still and know that I'm God. Then I will be exalted among the nations. Then I will be exalted on the earth. It's talking about salvation. Knowing God is salvation. And there's a global implication, making him known among all the people. So biblically, salvation is about knowing God. So in Romans 8:29, those whom he foreknew are those that he had entered into relationship with before the first sunrise. That's what he's talking about. Why in the world do we know that the promise that all things work together for good? Well, we don't have a promise if God is not sovereign. And the reason that we know is because God is sovereign. He says all things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose, for those whom he foreknew. God knew you. That's why. God knew you. God's not a spectator in world events or in salvation. God's not a spectator. He doesn't just know info. God ordains. He's in control of info.